what the motivation was to come up with this, what the use cases are, and then we're going to jump into the technical details. So this is going to be a technical talk. So yeah, there will be some low-level details. All right. Maybe first, who am I? Why am I giving this talk? I joined Lightning Labs in September last year, and LSAT was one of my first projects that I started working on at Lightning Labs. So I helped code the aperture, which I'm also going to talk about, which is the last item on the list. So I also helped write some of the specification, and yeah, that's why I'm here. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, we're not going to talk about the law school admission test. Apparently there's a collision in the acronym. What we mean with LSAT is the Lightning Service Authentication Token. It's first and foremost, it's a protocol specification originally written by Lalo, aka Roast Beef, but it's also a proposal for a new standard. So we wrote a document. Most of what I'm talking about you can find in this document. It's under lsat.tech. And it's a combination of HTTP, macaroons, of course, Lightning, and these three things combined equal LSAT. And it's also the future TM, as mentioned in the official HTTP RFC. The status code 402 was in there from the beginning, but it always said reserved for future use. Because at the time, there was no way you can easily pay online through a digital cash system. So it stayed reserved until the Lightning Network arrived, and we think that the future is now, because now we have a digital cash system that we can use to pay on the internet. Next slide, please. Before we're going to look at how exactly it works, we wanna look at the motivation, or why do we need yet another protocol or yet another standard. Today's web is skewed a bit. It's either you use a service, and if it's free, you are basically the product. Your being on the service is sold. Either you looking at ads, or you looking at more ads because you click on an article that then doesn't really contain any useful information. You're tracked throughout all the experience. So every penny is pressed out of you as a user. On the other hand, if you want to pay for something, you usually have to give all your information. Your name, your date of birth, your credit card information, email address. You have to choose a password, and hopefully a new password every time. So yeah, either way, it's usually not a very satisfying experience. And most of the incentives are just not aligned with what the user expects or wants. So we want to change that, or hope that this can change. Next slide, please. Okay, so what can we do with LSAT? Well, first of all, it allows you as a owner of content on a website to sell it. So you can monetize the content that you before either gave out for free or monetized through ads, or maybe sold through a credit card-based subscription system. It also allows you to give paid access to your API. It can, if you're a service, you can replace the API keys that you might have used before. You can replace this with LSAT as a technology. To give the user a possibility to create an ad hoc identifier. No personal information from the user has to be given. It's a lightning payment is involved, but because the payer doesn't give out any information, so not even the public key of the node that is paying is revealed. So the service that accepts LSAT doesn't know anything about you other than the identifier it gives you. And because the second part we're using is a fancy, cool technology called macaroons, you can also come up with your own custom payment model. You can pay per request, so every time you load a new article, you have to pay, or you can do metered payment, like every megabyte you download, you have to get the new token, pay again. Or you can say, let's make a token that's valid for a week or a month or whatever. We're going to look into the technical details of these macaroons later. Next slide, please. You also get some side effects from using LSAT, or if you're using a reverse proxy that I'm going to talk about later as well, you also get the simple denial of service protection. Because if you say you can only access a resource after you've paid a Lightning payment, this already detracts most of just brute force distributed DOS. For the developers, if you can just put some reverse proxy in front of your application, you have a very strong decoupling from the payment logic and the authentication from what you as a developer care about providing your service. So it's a nice way of just extracting the payment part, and you as a developer can focus on what you're building for your users. And on the user side, if software is starting to use this protocol and support it, maybe build into browsers through plugins or external tools, or add this as a mobile app, then you get the unified user experience across all of these websites that use LSAT for authentication and payment. For example, the last time I gave this talk, it was a live stream, then I could do a demo. It's a bit hard to do in VR, but there I could use a tool, the browser plugin, to easily pay something and get access to the paid content immediately. So the whole process took me less than 5 seconds. Next slide, please. This might be a bit small for VR, but as I said, the same diagram is also on the website. Let's look at what actually happens if I go to a website that uses LSAT. On the left side, we have the client. Let's say this is just my browser. I want to read an article, which is the protected resource. It's an article that the author wants me to pay for. So the author of the website created or put an authentication server in front. This acts as a gatekeeper. It's tasked with the authentication part. It's sometimes also called a reverse proxy. So all the requests I do go through this reverse proxy and are checked every time. So I open a website, go to the article, and click on Read Article. The authentication server intercepts my request, sees, oh, there's no token of any sort attached. So it goes to its L&D, creates an invoice, creates a token, a macaroon, and sends both of these pieces back to me, to the client, with the HTTP status code, as I mentioned before, 402 payment required. My browser, or let's say the plugin that I use, recognizes this, can extract the invoice. It is connected to an LND itself, pays the invoice, and by paying the invoice, I get back a pre-image, which is the secret that proves that I have paid. And the pre-image together with the token that I received, I can combine into what we call the LSAT. So the LSAT is the final token exists once you have the macaroon plus the proof of payment. So these two pieces combined equal the LSAT. Next slide, please. So the next time I click on the read article, or obviously this would probably just happen in the background after I click the first time, that the plugin would handle this and try the request again. Now with the token, the macaroon and the pre-image combined, sends the same request again. The authentication server can check, oh yeah, it's paid, fetches the resource, the article I wanted to read, and returns it to me, and I can read it. So real world, this would probably take less than a second. Next slide, please. Okay, so why do we need this token? I know there are other services out there that kind of do a similar scheme already, where you can pay for an article. One of the well-known examples is yals.org. But why do we need an extra token? Why isn't just a Lightning payment? Why isn't that enough? Well, the problem is that the pre-image, this payment secret, in theory is known to all of the nodes that are involved in the payment. So all of the hops my payment goes through could, in theory, use this to read the same article, which isn't always optimal. And the second reason is that with just having paid, I don't get any of the fine-grained control over what am I allowed to do now. So the website would still need to create some sort of identity and link the payment to it to allow for more fine-grained control. So what makes LSAT different from all the other proposed protocols is that we use a token. And of course, it's not a payment token as in Shitcoin. It's just some signed piece of data that also has a signature of the person or the authority that issued it. In our case, it's the authentication server. And because we already use macaroons in LND, we know it's an awesome technology. It gives us many cool features, so we chose macaroons as the cryptographic token. We could have gone with a JSON Web Token or any similar technology that allows us to have a signature, but we are already familiar with macaroons, and we will see all of the benefits soon. Okay, now let's look at how this actually looks on the HTTP level. Next slide, please. It's kind of simple. There is not even a new HTTP header, because the www authenticate and the authorization headers, they both exist, and they even give you the opportunity to add your own scheme. So what we did here is 100% key compliant. So every browser understands it. It doesn't necessarily know what it contains or what to do with it, but it won't reject it because it's valid HTTP headers. So the first part, that the challenge, is what the authentication server sends back to the client if it detects that I haven't paid yet or don't have a token yet. What it contains is, first part, the macaroon, the cryptographic token. It's base64 encoded, and we also get an invoice, which is just the BEC32, I believe, according to the Bolt 11 specification. So I get these two pieces of data. I as a client store the macaroon for later use, take the invoice, take it to my LND node, pay it, I receive the pre-image, and then I do the same request again, and this time I attach a header that says authorization, LSAT, here's my Mac, and then here's my pre-image. And both of these two pieces combined, the server can make sure, oh yes, user paid, and can then give me back the resource I requested. Next slide, please. Cool thing is, because we use gRPC for offer services, and gRPC is basically HTTP2 on steroids, or like a subset of HTTP2. This more or less works out of the box with gRPC as well. The only kind of the small difference is that gRPC ignores the HTTP status code, so it doesn't really know what 402 means, which is kind of sad because it's kind of cool to finally use this HTTP status code. So we just include this gRPC message, which is the custom message. But everything else works more or less the same. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go into some details about macaroons. What are they exactly? It's a triple of public identifier. This is basically your pseudonymous user identification. Contains a list of caveats. We will explain what these are in next slides. And the signature. The signature allows the receiver of the macaroons to check whether they themselves created it. So if a server creates a macaroon, it can later check if it's still the same, hasn't been modified, or not modified in an illegal way, and that he or it, the server, actually created. If you want to know more about how exactly they work on a technical level, you can watch my YouTube stream recording from last year's Hack Day, Fulmo Hack Day. I go into all the HMAC stuff and all the low-level basic. So why do we use them in LSAT? I mentioned some of the features before. The cool thing about this is that in the macaroon you have capabilities encoded. So it's not identity that I have then to map roles onto on the servers. No, it's the macaroon itself contains what I am allowed to do. So I, as a server, I can encode all the rights, all the capabilities I have into the macaroon. And because I myself as a user cannot change it without breaking the signature, I can't add rights to it. It also gives myself as the user the possibility to attenuate these rights further, so restrict them myself and then give the restricted subset maybe to another user. So if I myself am a service operator and I receive a macaroon from somewhere, I can attach further restrictions to it and then give it to someone else to use, for example. We'll we'll come to some possible use cases there. And the macaroon itself can also contain a very fine-grained list of permissions. Let's look at an example. Can we have next slide, please? One of our first product or service that we enabled LSAT on is Loop, Lightning Loop. This is just one, the first of many services that we are going to enable LSAT on. And for the moment, if you use the newest client software, it will in the background automatically acquire an LSAT and pay for it. The price is very low. It's 1 Satoshi at the moment. It's kind of in the testing phase to see if everything works as expected. So it's not really expensive yet.
And hey, Ali,
but we are.
I don't know. Can you just briefly say what Loop is?
Sure. Loop is a service that allows you to manage your liquidity. So you can exchange your off-chain balance that you have in your channels to on-chain balance. So I can send my Lightning Bitcoin to on-chain, or the other way around. If I don't have any outgoing liquidity anymore, I can put in, can pay some on-chain payment and then receive that in Lightning. So it's a way to manage my channel liquidity. And because it's an interesting service to start experimenting on with these tokens and capabilities, we enabled LSAT on the Loop service a few weeks ago. What you get in the background if you use the service is an LSAT token that contains more or less this information you see on the screen. So the first part, the identifier part, contains a version. It's always good to have a version. It contains a user ID. That's just a random ID that is created. It doesn't link to anything you're doing or you are. And then the payment hash. And the payment hash is the same hash that it was in the invoice that you paid to get the token. And then the list of caveats. And these are now restrictions put in by the server. These at the moment don't really look that much like restrictions, more like enumeration of things you can do. So this, for example, we say, okay, you can do Loop with this. So the service you're allowed to use is Loop, and the service tier is tier 0. Don't have a tier 1 yet, so it's just for future use. On Loop, you have the capabilities of doing Loop out and doing Loop in. So both, these are the only two operations you can do on Loop. So you have all the rights there are. And this isn't implemented yet, but in the future we could also say, okay, and for Loop out, your monthly allowed volume in Satoshis is 20 million. So 200 million, so 2 BTC. With this token, you could use both Loop in, Loop out indefinitely, but only up to a monthly volume. Okay, now let's say this we're a business like Bitrefill. We do a lot of loops, and maybe we do them from different nodes with different users. So this is the admin macaroon I get, and now I have employees that I want to give the right to do the actual loops. So I go ahead myself without interaction with the Lightning Labs server. I take this macaroon and I add my own caveats to it. So what we see on the next slide, we're already here. Okay, that's good. I just add these two new lines. So append this to the existing one, and the caveats are always gone through in order. And now with this new macaroon, the user only has the capability of doing loop in and only for 1 BTC a month. So without going to the server and telling them, hey, we have this new user that needs restricted access, can you please give me a new token that does only loop in, I can just do that myself. And because I, as the user that gets this macaroon, I cannot go back. That's the cool thing about the macaroons, that the cryptographic construct is I can only add stuff, and if I don't have the previous version without these restrictions, I cannot take them away. So I'm stuck with only doing loop in and only 1 BTC a month. Next slide, please. What we talked about here, these are the so-called first-party caveats, and there are also third-party caveats. This is a bit advanced stuff, and we didn't implement any of this yet. So, but this just shows the potential that this offers when we are using macaroons. What we can do with these so-called third-party caveats is do delegation of the authentication. So we go into the same territory as OAuth, that I can say and code into my macaroon, hey, here you have it, but you need someone else to sign on it. It's I've come up with, or we've come up with this example for Bitcoin Bounty Hunt, the first-person shooter. I think they're going to implement this. So we talked about this and came up with the scheme. Is for those that aren't familiar with the shooter, is that the player run around in this world, collect satoshis that are lying around, and frag other players or kill them with weapons and collect the bounty that is on their heads. And external advertisers can buy space inside the game to put on their ads. And that's where the satoshis come from that the player collects. So the players are paid for playing and looking at ads. Well, okay, we look at ads, internet, which I said is bad, but hey, here at least I get paid for looking at ads and killing other players. But what the author of the game told me is that, yeah, they want to auction this right to sell the ad spots, but they don't want to write the whole auction platform. So it would be cool if the auction platform was a third party, that the game could just say, hey, okay, here's a macaroon and an invoice, go to this auction platform, win or make sure you are the highest bidder, get the signature from the auction platform, and once you come back with the third-party signature, you can then upload your ad image or whatever. And the cool thing is that even though the auction platform is involved and sees part of the authentication steps, they themselves cannot misuse their power and place ads themselves because they don't have the whole macaroon that the user has. So long story short, we can do really, really cool stuff with this in the future. And all the pieces are there. We added a PR in LND that lets you create this shared secret that is necessary for this. And all the details are in this very old issue. We documented this a little bit. Okay, now to, I think, the last slide already. Yes, second to last. What's Aperture? It's very simple. It's to make LSAT work. It's a simple reverse proxy, an authentication reverse proxy. It supports proxying HTTP, HTTP2, and gRPC. That includes all the streaming stuff. So basically, we can put this proxy in front of any service that we want to use LSAT with. And that's the software we put in front of Loop. And all the client requests go through it and are checked for the token. It's been in production for a few weeks now. Don't remember the exact date. So how does this look? Next slide, please. Yeah. So we have the aperture in the middle. It's HTTP proxy. We could have written an Nginx plugin or an Apache plugin, but we didn't want to depend on any other software, so we wrote it ourselves, but we hope that someone will implement plugins soon that do the same. And it just takes all the browser or Loop client's requests, makes sure they have a token. It stores the secrets necessary for the macaroons in an etcd database, and then forwards the requests once they're authenticated to the actual backend, which in this case would be the Loop server, or as another example, the Boss core if you wanted to sell access to the node scoring backend service. Yes, that's it from my side already. Can I go? Yes, last slide. Thank you very much for listening, and I have all the time this evening, so I'm happy to answer hopefully all your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. This was great.
Thanks.
We even made the slides work.
Yeah, that was good work on the slide. Thank you. It was very quick, so I almost didn't notice. I
tried my best.
Yeah.
Okay, ready to take some questions?
Yes, of course.
Can I actually just ask something quickly before
Sure,
we start?
sure. Go ahead.
Now I can speak. I've learned my power to speak here.
Did you amplify your voice though?
Oh.
Just so that everyone can hear you.
Okay. Cool.
Great.
Thank you, Ollie. That was super interesting. But so for me, part of what I'm most excited about with LSAT, as I think you discussed, the privacy elements and the ability, to not have to log in really, to be able to authenticate. You don't need username and password. It's like there's so many sites out there, and Rudy and I talked about this in VR last week, where our personal data and information is stored. And I know you talked a little bit about the use cases and gaming use cases, but I just wanted to know for the audience, what use cases are you most excited about for LSAT? And then, what have we seen? I know some people are already building some apps in the community, but I don't know if you talk to folks. What are they doing right now in terms of building?
Yes, the use cases. Yeah, I'm not really that good in thinking up cool ideas and use cases, but I've heard many mentioned. For example, why do I need to give my email address and password if I just want to use the service once, maybe order something and never come back there? So everything that they usually want is my money, and I can just give it to them. And if it's a digital good, they shouldn't really need to care who I am or where I live. They can just give me the video or the picture that I want to buy or use, or the article I want to read. I think this would eliminate the need for most of our username password logins today. Of course, everything that's somehow linked to the real world, you probably still need to give a shipping address or something, but could be a shipping proxy or whatever. So there are so many websites, I feel like I use them once, but still they have a password and email address and probably much more. So I'm really excited to get rid of this. But for me personally, the problem with the ads is a bigger one. I install an ad blocker. It's the first thing I do after installing a browser. I just hate ads. But there's usually no possibility to just donate a few cents to a website that creates awesome content. And I am really willing to pay. That's not the problem. And everyone who says, no, users want everything for free, I don't believe that. If we can get clean content without any advertising or our data being sold, I think users are willing to pay for this. Third point, use cases that are already being implemented. I know of the Boltwall project, I think it's called, that switched over to LSAT after we published the specification. Actually, a little bit before, there was some collaboration between them and us.
Is that the Tyrion one, Ollie?
Yeah, the Tyrion Boltwall, I think it's called. They jumped on this idea very quickly and they implemented it on their paywall product. They also wrote a very cool online JavaScript toolkit where you can play around like with the encoding of the LSAT. I think it's called the LSAT Playground. It's also linked in our specification website. So it's really cool. People really appreciate the effort to create the standard. And I think it was also the people at Tyrion that worked together with Christopher Allen, I think, from the W3C committee. So there are already talks about this to make it an official standard. It's not driven by us, by Lightning Labs, but we of course support this. It would be awesome to have an official W3C standard that finally gives the 402 status code a real meaning. And maybe you could even rewrite the original RFC and remove the future use in there, but maybe that's taking it too far.
Cool.
All right.
Cool. Okay.
Thanks for the question.
So let's open it for some questions from the audience. So you guys will see a raise hand button on the right bottom corner of your screen. You can just click that and I'll let you ask. So let's see. First off, we have Andrew. Andrew, go ahead.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Just want to make sure.
Yep.
Awesome. Ollie, great presentation. Really loved it.
Thank you.
So this is a huge win for users and consumers for sure, especially on the privacy side. How do you think about some of the incentives for corporations and companies that really do stand to benefit from tracking users' data and benefiting from the analytics they can glean from that when they capture it? And what sort of incentives do they have to implement this on their platforms?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably going to be hard to transition the existing companies to not track you anymore, right? Because yeah, as you said, that they earn their money with this. But what my hope is that you can implement LSAT as an additional income. So all the users that you might not get because they are not willing to pay $50 for a year of a subscription, you can just give the option to read one article and pay through Lightning. So it could be like an additional revenue stream. And if users, consumers actually jump on this and are willing to use this, it could maybe push the incentives toward getting rid of the subscriptions, getting rid of the tracking. And of course, it's also important that we as users really are careful that we insist on not giving our information, right? Because of course LSAT, but it's not in the protocol by default. You as a service provider, you could add stuff like this, but we as users, we don't want this, and we have to be insistent on not being tracked.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think we'll probably end up seeing both options, right? So the option to use LSAT without having to give your information, but then probably some sort of additional incentives for a user to actually give their information to a company so that they can continue to track that user. And then everyone will just have to, become mindful of, it's kind of a mind shift for the general consumer. Be mindful of your data and privacy. But yeah, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. And hopefully we can just get rid of some of the existing services and replace them with non-clickbait versions that were actually useful content. So yeah.
Can I actually just quickly comment on that?
Yeah.
Cool. No, I think that's a great question. And my response would also be that, obviously we're sitting here in VR. The world has changed dramatically, in the last 2 months. So I actually see this as a window of opportunity in terms of a lot of people saying, okay, we are having a decade worth of change in a couple of weeks, but if it was possible in a couple of weeks, it's, a couple of weeks worth of change just accelerated. So I actually see new entrants and new players having a huge opportunity. So one example would be in the US, bank payments are so slow between banks. And actually just today, I saw that it was possible to send faster payments between certain accounts. And what was the incentive again? Because they obviously get more interest when they hold your money longer to, so that you can't instantly send between accounts. Of course, there were like a variety of other systems that made it slower. So similarly, I feel like this is a consumer and user demand around products that aren't going to attract you. But to me, I just think that we have a window of opportunity to create new products and new paradigms and systems that are not going to subscribe to that. And if people continue to do that, well, maybe they won't last because we'll have new entrants and new opportunities. So I'm really excited to see what people build. And then in terms of using LSAT to track people, well, you can always kind of use it, like re-authenticate with another token, right? So it's not like you're going to have to be persistently tracked, even if somebody were to try, right, Ollie?
Yeah, exactly. It's if you want to get rid of your previous identity, okay, you buy a new token if it's worth you, and maybe we want to keep them cheap. So yeah, definitely. It's like
you can have a kind of portable identity of sorts, or a transient identity where you have it, you're using a service and you get rid of it, then you have a new one.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Cool.
Thanks.
Okay, next question from Patrick. Go ahead, Patrick.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ollie, for the great presentation. I have a question regarding the protocol. So I think KeySend has been part of LND for some time now. Is there a way to pay for the token right with the first request so that you can knock off some round trips in the protocol? So you don't have to wait for, can basically pay upfront and then get the token back immediately. Is that possible? Thanks.
That's an interesting question. Maybe we could implement. Of course, maybe with some tricks we could do it that way. But the problem is that you also need to get the macaroon, and the macaroon is linked to the payment. But well, let me think about that. It's
but
cool
you
idea.
Can send the. Yeah, you can send the pre-image. You can send it. It's encrypted, right, in the payment, and you can have some custom records as well. You can say you can describe what you want in the custom records, right? You can put arbitrary data there, and then if it's the right amount, then right. Otherwise, you can reject. Or
definitely. So I could send the KeySend payment and code in there. Hey, this is for the LSAT. I'm going to request in a moment. And then it's a great idea. Of course, we accept PRs to the specification itself. So if you're interested, I'd be happy to look at it and review it. Thanks,
okay.
Great question.
Thank you.
Cool. Next up, BTC Kitty. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello. So I can see how this is super useful metered to offer like a monthly subscription, what would stop my users from like sharing the LSAT with all their friends?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a recurring question as well. Yeah, the sharing of the token is not handled by the protocol or the specification itself, so it is quite easy to share. But I think that might be up to the service to decide whether this is a big bug or this should be allowed. I think of the Netflix model where you're allowed to use up to 5 computers or something like that. So there is some sharing of accounts. They know people are going to share. So do you want to make it very difficult or try to ban users? It's up to the service. You of course can try to limit it. You can say, okay, after 5 different IP addresses that use a token, I'm gonna block it or whatever. So we kind of left that open in the protocol, but that's maybe something you as a service provider want to think about, whether it's okay, you just tolerate it up to a certain limit or not. But yeah, it's definitely something to think about. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, BTC Kitty. Ollie, I'm just going to keep throwing questions at you until you stop me. So
yeah,
just
sure.
so you know. Okay, let's go with MZ.
Hello.
Hey.
I'm here. Great talk, thank you. Also, a more technical question. I didn't get how to, if I pay my invoice, I will get a pre-image, and how I get a pre-image in the browser. Do I have to have a plugin in the browser to pay with it, or is there a manual method or some, how does it work?
Yeah, good question. We do have a testnet instance, and there we have this demo I did in person last time. It's a very simple HTML page where you can try this out. And there you have 2 possibilities. If you have a plugin like Joule installed, you can just click on a button. It will open Joule, ask you, hey, do you want to pay this 1 Satoshi? You say yes, and then it happens in the background automatically. If you don't have a plugin, then of course the browser itself wouldn't know what it is, or not yet. Maybe in the future would be cool. But you can also copy the invoice out, pay it, copy the pre-image, and then put it back into the browser. So yeah, both steps work. But of course, it would be so cool. Instead of integrating a shitcoin in your Brave browser, why not integrate Lightning? That would be great.
Yep.
So,
Project for
great
anybody
question.
that wants a longer hack project, make a Lightning browser. Udi, have you had a Willow Byrne? He could be someone cool, the creator of Joule.
Oh
To
yeah.
chat
If I
about
had
Joule.
what?
Willow Byrne speaking at all? Like idea for a future talk?
Sounds good. I like it.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Cool. Okay, let's see who's up. So we have Mags. Mags, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sweet. Okay, so I saw at the beginning of the presentation you talked about things maybe like metered services and pay-per use, and I know we've been kind of talking a lot about content, but where my head went, just because I have a bit of a renewable clean tech energy background, is have you talked about or have people thought about, when it comes to kind of like renewable energy, kind of creating microgrids or sharing? There's some kind of projects where you can store energy and you can hook up your EV, but you're kind of like you're using a certain amount of kilowatts. Have you guys looked at energy application, or is anyone looking at it, or is that kind of a different part of the tech that would apply to this?
I haven't thought about it directly, and I don't know of anyone who's working on this.
I can just chime in. That is
Yeah,
something
sure.
that people have brought up vis-a-vis Lightning in the past. And certainly, look, this is an open protocol and anyone can build on top of it. And I think, LSAT could potentially bring some interesting use cases. My understanding was always how do you verify that, the energy as per like the meter is actually what is being tracked? So that would be like a more central API type situation. But when it comes to just the payment part, I don't see why, Lightning and potentially some degree of LSAT couldn't be used. So I know like in the very, very early days, I think it was March 2017, some folks in France had Lightning testnet coins where you could actually charge a device and pay with Lightning. And it was an early hack
Awesome.
project. So, obviously that was much more simple than kind of a full electricity grid. So, I would say it would be cool to reach out to that community, people that are building applications there and get them involved.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Because I see, like, maybe it's a lot harder, to implement in a fully existing grid system. But when you have, some communities, for example, up north communities where they're off grid, you can kind of create these, smaller microgrid communities where maybe I put up some solar panels and maybe you, my neighbor, want to purchase it a little bit more from me because at some points it's cheaper. It's a neat thing to look at or consider, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. And I can easily see Lightning itself or LSAT as an identity solution being used for all sorts of use cases, including energy meter tracking. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mags. We have another question from Hashbasher. Go ahead.
Hey guys.
Hey.
I was maybe I missed a little bit about the authentication part. So let's say you buy an article and your browser crashes before you could read it, and you come back. Is that stored somewhere that you purchased this already, or because of the browser crash you have to pay again?
Kind of
I guess it
depends probably on the plugin. Well, obviously, or I can say how it works in Loop. We store the token that we get, and the pre-image we store it on disk. The next time we start Loop, it still knows I have a token I already paid, so I can just use this. So hopefully the browser or the plugin would store the token, and hopefully the service would know, oh, you have paid for exactly this article, you're allowed to read it again. Or maybe it's already encoded in the macaroon which article you paid for, and as long as it's the token is stored before your crash, you can read it whenever you want.
Okay, great. And one more thing about the invoice. When you're, during the authentication process, you send back the invoice that needs to be paid. How do you do that? Is that a header?
Yeah, it's the www authenticate header, where you say here's the macaroon, and then second part, here's the invoice. So yes,
okay.
It's a header, yes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem.
Great, thanks. And it seems like we have another question from BTC Kitty. So here we go.
Yeah, hi. Is there a website I can try using Loop with Joule?
No, because Loop currently only works with gRPC, and Joule is a browser plugin, so and the browser doesn't know gRPC, so unfortunately not yet. But I heard that Willowburn is maybe integrating Loop itself into Joule, so maybe in the future.
Then we definitely have to get him here for a talk.
Yeah. Let's bring him here and ask him.
Cool. Well, stay tuned, and then we'll make that happen.
Absolutely. Let's see. We have another question from Andreas. Is it a real Andreas, or are you a fake Andreas? There's no way to know. But go ahead.
My voice is my passport. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Great presentation, Ali. Sorry I missed the beginning, so I don't know if you already covered this. Is LSAT something that I could experiment with today, or is that totally #reckless? I can imagine the first types of applications would be Lightning-based infrastructural services like inbound liquidity, or API services for information about the network, routing, stuff like that. In which case I'd like to experiment using that on my own nodes, either for APIs or web-based services. would that be reckless?
Ollie?
Oops, wrong button. Sorry. I wouldn't say it's reckless. It's first and foremost a specification. We use it in production, so the loop server is already behind the LSAT proxy, so you have to pay to get a token. So I would definitely encourage you to experiment with it, and it's the Lightning part itself might be considered reckless, or I would consider it a little bit reckless, yeah, on mainnet, but the rest of the LSAT spec is not much more reckless, I would say, because the macaroons as a technology, they've been around since 2014. It's invented by Google. I know Google uses it internally, so probably the cryptography behind it is probably quite sound. So I would be nice to see more people experimenting. So yeah, go ahead and ask us questions on GitHub too. The spec, I maybe didn't mention this. The spec itself is also on GitHub. If you go to lsat.tech, I think there's a button somewhere, fork me on GitHub, that links you to the spec document. So,
Cool, thanks. So looks like, unless someone wants to raise their hand at the last minute, looks like that's all the questions we have for now. So huge thanks, Ollie, for doing this talk. It was really great.
You're welcome. Thanks for organizing and converting the slides. I know it's quite some work, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
For sure. No, it was worth it. And thank you guys for showing up. This was awesome. As a reminder, we do those every week. There's going to be another one in the next weekend on Saturday at the same time. If you guys are watching this and you want to join, then you can find Reckless VR on Twitter and on Telegram. And you can go to recklessvr.com to sign up to our newsletter and get invites straight to your mailbox. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So
who's
I'm
speaking
going to
next
unmute
week,
you.
Udi?
That's still a secret, but
Oh,
I'll reveal it very
right.
soon. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. I guess what we usually do after those meetups is we jump into VR Chat, which is another VR app, and it's kind of like going out for a beer after the meetup because it's like more colorful and fun, and you can use cool avatars, and we have a cool Bitcoin Citadel world and a whole bunch of other worlds there. So if you guys want to join that, in about 20 minutes, I'm going to send the instructions in the Telegram chat for joining this. Until then, you can stay here and just hang out, or you can take a short break. And that's it. See you next week. Bye.